Welcome to the Lakeside Church of Christ. We're glad that you're here and that you have come for Bible class. And we are excited to be able to study God's Word with you. We have been studying the ministry of Jesus and just looking at His life and everything that was going on around it. And we finished up recently talking about John the Baptist and Jesus' baptism, and then the temptation of Jesus last week. So after he was baptized, it says he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil for 40 days. So we looked at that last week and talked about how all this was really the beginning of his ministry, right? This was the start of everything. We have very little about Jesus and his life, very little information before this point where he starts, before John the Baptist, other than his birth and some events that took place the next couple of years after that. And the one episode where he was at the temple, right? The age of 12. So other than that, we really don't have much. And the rest of the Scripture is mainly about this. And I think that's why we do have what we have concerning the life of Jesus. Right? I'm sure Jesus did many interesting things as a teenager. Right? Even the Son of God had to be a teenager at one point. And I'm sure I know he was the perfect teenager, but still a teenager. Right? Even the perfect ones can, So, we don't have much of that, but what we do have is the information we need concerning our salvation. And we are diving really into that now. So before this, it's just things kind of that's been happening to Jesus. He went and he was baptized. John the Baptist led the way, went into the wilderness to be tempted. But now we're really going to get into the heart of Jesus' ministry, where we start to see him doing more, and he's going out and preaching and teaching, and specifically the first thing we're going to look at is the calling of his disciples, the calling of the apostles. So, can anyone name the apostles? Ooh, start with a little trivia this morning. If you know the song, it'll help you. Yeah, yes. Now you raised your hand. You have to say them.
Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James, Thaddeus, Simon, and Judas, and then Matthias.
Ooh, absolutely good. That was great. Yeah. You didn't even have to sing. I still have to sing it to get them all listed out. So that's great. Yeah, so obviously, we have a little fast forward there with Matthias. That will be a part that I do not cover, and I don't think it'll actually be covered in this. I think we stop at the Gospels, but yes, the calling of the apostles. Now, interesting to note, sometimes we have them, and we just have them listed as the 12 and have their names listed. But they were not all called right at the same time. It wasn't like there was some kind of gathering that happened and Jesus just looked through and said, okay, I'll take you and you and you and you and you and you, and said, come follow me. It didn't quite pan out that way. Jesus called them, but when he called them, where did he usually find them? Now, we don't have information on all the apostles when exactly they were called. Right? But we do have some of them and when they were called. And where did he usually find them? Working, didn't he? I think that's very interesting that he chose to call them while they were working. We're going to be in John chapter 1 at first because really we see the beginning of this calling of the disciples, calling of these apostles being connected back to John the Baptist. So we're going to have to jump back just a little bit before we head forward again. But we're going to get there to John 1 here in just a minute. But before we go, I want to ask you, why do you think he called them while they were working? Why would he call them while they're working? You know when I don't like getting a call from we might say just my family? It's when I'm working, right? It's like, I'm working. You know, it is sometimes precious, get calls from the kids. Dad, can we play a game later? Sure. But I'm working, right? I remember calling my mom when she would be at work. And, she didn't have the luxury I do of just, one, having a cell phone, but two, having the job that I have. She worked in an office, and you had to call a secretary, and the secretary would have to get her. So she would get pretty hot whenever I'd call if it wasn't for a good reason, Like, what are you doing? Calling me at work. So what do you think? He called him at work. Why would he do that? Now, we know we're not talking about a cell phone, right? Okay. The impact. Okay, right? So the impact on them, but he says also the people around them, right? If they're at work, they're going to be surrounded by others, right? And that might have an impact.
Someone to call them, Hi, look at the microphone. They weren't sitting in their house saying, I hope someone comes to my door today. They were out there doing the normal duty. I'm not sure.
Yeah, right. So they were just going about their day. They were doing the normal, the average for them. Wake up and go to work. Right? We've all lived that life. Wake up, go to work. Come home, sleep, repeat. Right? So they were just out at their their normal place, just basically going through and living their life. Go ahead.
Is there a reason that I feel like Jesus was already familiar with most of these guys? They already knew who he was?
Well, now we do know that some of them were from the same area, at least, and maybe most of them from the same area of Galilee. So that they might be familiar with each other already could be true. I don't know that we could say that any of them maybe were already close to Jesus. I don't know. Again, that's kind of that area before all this started that we don't really know much about, right? We don't know much about him. But maybe if they didn't know him personally, they might have known of the family, right? They might have known of Joseph the carpenter, or maybe they just knew him as a carpenter, right? Like, oh yeah, that's Jesus, he's a carpenter. He did some work on my porch the other day, whatever. Go ahead.
Wasn't it Andrew a follower of John the Baptist?
Yeah, and we're going to see that here in John 1. So he did have some information, and we're going to see Andrew was very important too in getting all this started as well. So we'll see that. But I do find it very interesting that he called them where they were at work, and I believe that part of that might have had to do with the decision they would have to make, right? This was a very important decision that they would have to make. And maybe he was trying to emphasize that by showing up at their workplace and saying, hey, it's time to pack up your stuff, let's go, right? I mean, a lot of people might call you to do a lot of things, and you say, oh, yeah, I can do that, it's my day off, right? Or I can check my calendar, right, Dale? Yeah, see, when I'm working, I can check my calendar, I can see it like, oh, yeah, I'm not working, I can help you do whatever you want, this is my day off. But if someone showed up to your workplace and said, hey, you need to clock out, it's time to go, we got to go do some stuff. You might think, well, I'm right here at work, right? I mean, this has to be very important, matter of life and death if you're gonna pull me out of work. And so it's interesting too that I just find that he does that in coming and calls them, the ones that we know of mainly were at work. Again, it's not always the case, but a lot of them were. All right, so let's get into our text very quickly. In John chapter 1, where we have again the first calling, and we're going to start in verse 35. So turn there, John 1, verse 35. All right, so we know that just previous to this, Jesus was baptized. That's what it says in the text right before that. So it has John the Baptist talking about the baptism of Jesus and how he saw the Spirit descend from heaven like a dove, and it remained on him. In verse 33 it says, I myself did not know him, but he who sent me to baptize with water said to me, He on whom you see the Spirit descend and remain, this is he who baptizes with the Holy Spirit, and I have seen and have borne witness that this is the Son of God. Now, John there saying, I did not know him, doesn't mean he didn't know who he was, as far as, oh, who is this guy? I've never seen him before. No, he would know Jesus, right? From the connection, again, very likely them being cousins, from the connection between Mary, right, the mother of Jesus, and Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. So, in a sense, family we're talking about here. And so they would know each other. They knew each other, but he did not know him to be the Messiah, right? He did not know him to be the Christ until this event. Until he saw the Spirit come down and descend upon Jesus and remain upon him. And he says that's when he knew. Now you might say, well, what about that discussion they had before he was baptized, right? He says, I shouldn't be baptized by you. Again, he might have held him as a very holy man, right? John the Baptist might have, even before this, recognized the holiness, and just how different Jesus was. Maybe considered him even before this a great prophet. I don't know. But he did not know him to be the Messiah until this event. So he knew he was leading the way for somebody. He knew that they were to come, but he did not know it was Jesus of Nazareth until this point. So verse 35 says this, the next day again, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked by and said, Behold the Lamb of God. Right? This they would understand, again, to be a reference to the Messiah. This would be a very clear way of pointing to Jesus and saying, this is the one that I have been preparing the way for. And as far as disciples go, you as my disciples have also been helping in this effort, right? And so he says here, this is the one. And it says in verse 37, the two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, What are you seeking? And they said to him, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? And he said to them, Come and you will see. So they came and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day, for it was about the 10th hour. So again, here we have these two disciples that were first disciples of John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist has pointed the way to Jesus, right? And so they have decided to go and to follow Jesus. All right, let's keep going. It says in verse 40, one of the two who heard John speak and followed Jesus was Andrew, right? So we learn this about Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, We have found the Messiah, which means Christ. He brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas, which means Peter. So, again, I want to pause right there. I don't want us to get this confused with Jesus calling Peter to be a disciple. We know that happened at a specific point in time. I guess a spoiler. Does anybody remember when Peter was called? Where was he at? He was fishing, right? He was on a boat. But it appears that Peter did in fact meet Jesus, was told by his brother Andrew, hey, we found the Messiah, And Peter comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, hey, Peter, right? Or, hey, Simon, we're going to call you Cephas, which means Peter in Greek, right? Petros is the Greek version of Cephas. So they both mean rock. So here, Jesus says, hey, I've got a name change for you, but this isn't specifically the time when Jesus called him to be an apostle. So we have to realize that. Sometimes we maybe get our timelines all mixed up, and that happens when we're reading the Gospels and reading the different accounts of the Gospels. So let's continue. It says in verse 43, it says, the next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, follow me. So where was Jesus at? Where was John the Baptist during this time? Right? Around the Jordan, right? Why was he at the Jordan? Do you remember? There was much water there, wasn't it? He was doing a lot of baptizing, him and his disciples, and so they were at the Jordan. Jesus went out to the Jordan to be baptized him, stuck around there for a little while, it appears, but now he's headed back to Galilee. He's headed back up to his home area of Galilee. Again, we're going to have information about the apostles that they were Galileans, right? Even if some may not have been from there, the majority was. They recognized them all as Galileans. So again, he found Philip and said to him, follow me. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. So again, where were Peter and Andrew from? Bethsaida, right? We're gaining a little bit of information. There's a lot of good information in here about the apostles. So that's where they were from. It says in verse 45, Philip then found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So, we talked about where Jesus mainly calls them, but that's not how a lot of them found out about Jesus the first time. How are they finding out? How is word of this spreading to these people we'll eventually know as the apostles? From the disciples. Word of mouth, isn't it? It's someone finding out that Jesus is the Messiah, and it's that person who is convicted to go and to tell someone else about this. Now, we don't know, in the grand scheme of things, how all this would have worked out if those people didn't go and tell them. Would these people who were told end up still becoming apostles? Maybe, maybe not. But could you imagine that? If we didn't have some of these men as apostles simply because someone decided not to tell, right? Someone decided to keep it to themselves. But these people are finding out that they found the Messiah and they're rushing out to tell others. The first people they go to, obviously, are their loved ones. People they know, their friends, their family, and they're spreading this message, hey, we found the Messiah. Go ahead.
A little tidbit of information. Bethsaida was a city on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. It was on the water, just east of Capernaum. Bethsaida doesn't show up on the map very often. It's sort of like a smaller city. Capernaum was the larger of the cities, and that's where Jesus spent most of his ministry. But it was right there in that same vicinity, and they were a lot of fishermen there.
Yes, and then we're going to find that out later too, that they did spend a lot of time in Capernaum, and maybe even that's where they settled down and kind of had a home base from, was in Capernaum, from Galilee, in the area of Galilee on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. And yes, they absolutely do a lot of work there. Now we know that Jesus tried to do some work in Nazareth, but it didn't really pan out that way. But that's kind of getting ahead of our lesson here. And he talked about how he really wasn't accepted in his hometown. Even said, hey, a prophet's not accepted in their hometown. But anyways, they end up spending a lot of time in Capernaum and this area. So, as we said here, right, they're calling them the people who are finding out about Jesus, that he is a Messiah. They're spreading the message, right? They were excited. And that's kind of where we have to tie ourselves into this lesson too, right? Is that when we find out that Jesus is the Christ, we need to spread that message. with excitement and enthusiasm. Not everyone's going to be as excited about it. Not everyone's going to be happy about it, just like it happened in the Scriptures, in the Gospels. But we should be telling people that Jesus is the Christ. Now, we take it for granted in our country that a lot of people already know, and whether they accept it or believe it, they already kind of know as Jesus being the Christ, right? So me going around and saying, hey, we found the Messiah and his name is Jesus, people are like, yeah, I already know, right? But I still think it's a bad idea. I mean, certainly it'll get a conversation started. I already know. Well, how do you know? How do you learn about it? It's a way to start a conversation. So even then, telling people that Jesus is the Messiah is still a very good thing to do. And not just taking everything for granted. Not just saying, oh, well, this is America. We all know, right? We don't. There's plenty of people here who do not. And that number is increasing, isn't it? Especially in the young people, that number is increasing of the people who do not know Jesus as the Christ. And so we need to be mindful of that. Just think of all the good that came from these people doing it. But then also think of all the good that God could do with our little seeds that we plant with others, right? That we're just going around and we're just planting seeds and telling people about Jesus. That has never changed. That mission from the time John the Baptist started it, right? And saying, that's Jesus, he's the Messiah. It still continues today. We are still pointing people to Jesus. Now, he was pointing forward to Jesus and the things that were come. We're pointing back to him, right? And saying, look at what he did. But also, again, reminding people that Jesus is alive. He is present. He is King of Kings. He is Lord of Lords. He is at the right hand of God. His kingdom is here. It's no longer at hand, right? That was the message. The kingdom is at hand. We're saying, hey, guys, the kingdom is here, and you need to join it. You need to be a part of it. And the Messiah is here. And so a very important part about how all of this started, before the calling, before the selecting or the appointing of the apostles, were these people who were hearing about Jesus and spreading the message. That's how many of them first came in contact with Jesus, was other people telling them about him. And so they said they found him, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Again there, the son of Joseph, we don't hear him referred to as that very often in the Scriptures. But again, this was that area in which Joseph would have operated as a carpenter, right? And we don't know what's happened to Joseph at this point. It's, again, very likely he has passed away, right? Because he's not mentioned, he's not talked about. But again, it's still thought of very honorably in the community. Otherwise, why would you introduce the Messiah and connect him with the name of Joseph, right? If you just ran off on him or did something else crazy, you wouldn't be talking about, oh, hey, this is the Messiah. And guess what? His dad was Joseph. No, they very openly said, this is the son of Joseph. But again, very likely the connection of him being a carpenter and working in that area.
This is kind of a postscript to all of this and maybe a little off topic, but you mentioned that, talking about Jesus, or that the knowledge of Jesus, at least a cursory knowledge of Jesus, is so common that many people understand it and believe it, but don't really follow it. And a good place to start a conversation might be that the kingdom is here, that the church is the kingdom. That's a point where people would be shocked now to want to study more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Jesus was good at using shock value too. And that's true. There's still many people who consider themselves Christians or whatever who think, well, the kingdom is not here. The kingdom is coming. And that, you're very right. That could be a great point in discussion. But we also don't want to just solely focus on the kingdom. We have to focus on the king as well, don't we? And so it's the kingdom is here. And why that matters is because there is a king ruling over his kingdom. And so that, again, is Jesus. So it says in verse 46, back to our text, John 1, Nathanael said to him, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Have you ever heard that saying before, right? Anything good come out of Nazareth? And so we don't know what all was intended behind that comment. But again, it's and for people who have been there and been to that area, Nazareth, not a very big area or big city, of course. Kind of, we might consider one of those towns out in the sticks, is what we would say back where I came from. It's just this, small town area. And to think that the most important person who has ever lived would come out of that area, right? You mean he's not coming out of Jerusalem. He's not coming out of one of these important places. What about Bethlehem, right? We didn't really go on into that, but Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and so that ties into the prophecies about him being born there. But still, he grew up and lived in Nazareth. And so Nathanael says, I don't know about that, because the Jesus, the son of Joseph that I know of, right, out of Nazareth, that doesn't sound right. Philip said to him, come and see. And again, there's so many important things to this, but again, it's just an invitation, isn't it? I mean, our job, we can complicate it as Christians, but at times it's very simple, right? It's just an open invitation to people. It's an invitation to people to say, come and see. I've said, maybe you've said something about Jesus, but you just need to come and see for yourselves. Whether that's an invitation to the worship services, hey, just come and see. Come and check it out. Or an invitation to study the Scriptures, where you can read more about Jesus, right? Where you can tell them and give them more information from the Word of God about Jesus, and it's just an invitation. Come and see. Very simple, very simple. And so he says, hey, come and see it for yourself. That also goes back to what I was saying earlier as well about, maybe people don't know about the kingdom, but people have opinions, right? Even if they're not very religious people, they have religious opinions, right? They may not be able to give you religious or, scripture or specific teachings, but they do have many religious opinions. And so, whatever it is, when we're dealing with that, again, just keep it simple and say, well, let's come and see. All right? Let's not argue back and forth. Let's not scream at each other or get mad. And that's not going to do anyone any good. Let's just go to the Scriptures and let's see what the Scriptures say. And it says in verse 47, Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said to him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. Right? It says, Nathanael, you are an honest man. You are a good man. Now, Nathanael is shocked by this, isn't he? Because it says in verse 48, Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? All right, so we don't really know each other. How do you know me? All right, if I was going to say that about one of you, I would have to know you very well. If I'm going to point to someone and say to someone else, now this person is an honest person, I'm not going to say that about anybody because I don't want to spoil my reputation, right? You told me they were an honest person, and I found out they're nothing but a cheat, a liar, right? They're no good, and I don't know how you could think they were an honest person. So I'm going to withhold that designation of being an honest or a person within whom there is no deceit for people I really know. And so he says here, Nathanael says, maybe we saw each other in passing before, but we certainly don't know each other in a way in which you should be able to say that about me. And so Nathanael is confused here, and again, we see one of the first wonderful, we might say miraculous things that Jesus does here in showing his knowledge that he has in Nathanael. So it says, Jesus answered him in verse 48, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. So Nathanael hears this, and he answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. So, again, before, GPS, before, Google had 1,000 satellites, they could look on us at all times, right? Before all this, it's amazing, right? That Jesus says, I know you. And I know where you were. Now, we don't know why this was such an important event or why Jesus specifically, surely he could have recalled other things that would have blown Nathanael's mind, right? But he chose that specific moment for a reason. And we don't know why, but in Nathanael's mind, he says, wow, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. And then verse 50 says, Jesus answered him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree. Do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angel of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And so, we have that very beginning, right? The very beginning where all this has happened, the connection with John the Baptist and the calling of these disciples. Let's skip into some other events that happened as well. How about when he decided to start calling the fishermen, right? So let's go to Matthew chapter 4. So if you remember last week, we were in Matthew 4 because the first part is about the temptation of Jesus. The second part here is when Jesus calls his first disciples. He calls them to be his students, to be his followers, to be, what we will eventually know them as the apostles. But at this point, we wouldn't really say they're apostles because what does the word apostle mean? Messenger, one who is sent, right? Right now they're just being called. We might just refer to them as disciples, students, and that's how they're often referred to in the beginning. It's not later on until they're what? Sent, that they really are starting to be called apostles. Now looking back on it, these men, obviously Matthew and others, John, Luke, Mark, that wrote the Gospels, they were writing from a standpoint of these men already being known as the apostles, right? The ones who were sent. And so they would often, we might see in the text, them referred to as apostles. But right now, simply, they are just being called to be the disciples of Jesus, the students of Jesus, his close inner circle that would be working with him and learning from him. He would be their rabbi, right, their teacher, and they would be his disciples, his students. Okay, so in verse 18 it says this, in Matthew chapter 4, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Now we know, because we've already read John 1 before, that Jesus has already met these two, right? And they've already met Jesus. We know that. But this is a specific event in which he is calling them, he is selecting them to be his disciples. It says, again, they were casting the nets in the sea because they were fishermen. And he said to them in verse 19, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men, right, or fishermen. So it says in verse 20, immediately they left their nets and followed him. Again, that's all that all-important part of how he called them while they were working, right, and they just leave their nets. They just drop it all, and they decide to follow him. Because why? Why would they do that? Why would you do that? Would you do that? Right? Jason, what were you going to say? Yeah. That's true. So, yeah. So, right, it is about your priorities, right? But it doesn't say much about their nets, right? We do know that they were mending their nets as well, too. So, this appears to be a time maybe in between the catching of fish as well. So we have this event where Jesus is calling them, they're at work, and they just drop everything because the only reason we have to give is there's nothing more important. There was nothing more important that was ever going to happen in their lives than following Jesus. And that is true for you as well. It's true for me. There is nothing more important in this world than following Jesus. Absolutely nothing. And Jesus gets right down to the nitty-gritty, we might say, of all this later on and saying, I'm talking about even your family, doesn't he? I mean, nothing in this world, to me, is more important than my family. I mean, they are the first ones that I want to minister to, the first ones that I'm teaching about Jesus, right? It's not that I'm going to forsake my Christian duties, but I think my Christian duty starts at home, right? And the people I evangelize to, the people I try to minister to and to help, right? It starts at home, and it goes out from there. But Jesus, again, there's nothing more important. Not even family is more important than following Jesus Christ. And so for them to leave their nets, to leave their jobs, to go and to follow Him, again, is commendable and shows great faith even here at the beginning. And Jesus might say even mustard seed faith. But that was enough, wasn't it? Because, the point with mustard seed faith is not about, again, how big the faith is, but it's about where the faith is placed, right? Who the faith is in. Because even small faith, if it's placed in the right area, that being God, that being Jesus, can do great things. And so for them to have this faith to, we talk about Peter later, how he steps out of the boat and walks on the water, but this was really his first step out of that boat on faith, wasn't it? Because he stepped out of the boat this time, maybe onto dry ground, but stepped out in faith to follow Jesus, simply knowing and believing that He was the Messiah.
Along those lines, it's also important for us to realize that they were willing to acknowledge Him as the Christ in a very important part of their lives. And that's sometimes what we struggle with, is, we're willing to acknowledge Him when we come together, but are we willing to acknowledge Him openly in every aspect of our lives?
Right, and that's a continual challenge, isn't it? Because that was the challenge continually for the disciples, for the apostles, even to the point where, right, Peter, the very person we're talking about, in the end, denies Jesus 3 times, even though he said, I'll give my life for you. Jesus said, that's funny. Well, probably didn't say that's funny, but was like, that's interesting because, in fact, you're going to deny me 3 times. He told him that ahead of time. Can you imagine that? Told him that ahead of time. And he still did it. But before you maybe poke fun and laugh at Peter, how many times has God told us what sin is in our lives, and then we still keep on doing it, right? It's kind of the whole Peter situation, isn't it? Chris?
Yep, you nailed it right on the head. And it's, what are you willing to give up? I mean, Peter gave up everything. And, so what in your life are you willing to give up to be right with Christ? What sin are you struggling with that you can see Peter as the example? And it's like, he gave up everything. Mm-hmm. You can deal with a little bit of struggle to give up what's holding you back. Yeah.
That's a very good point, right? And it does extend to that. What sin is holding you back from following Jesus? But noticing this too, that Peter and Andrew being a fisherman was not a sin. They didn't give up a sin. They gave up a blessing. I mean, them having a job and an occupation was a blessing. But the blessing was not more important and not greater than the one who blessed them with it, right? It's like the gift that you're given is not better or greater than the gift giver. And that's true for this. And we have to realize that we can allow the blessings of God to come between us and God. And we should never do that. Even the fear, sometimes it's the fear of the loss of the blessings that we have. And so we'll deny or we'll reject or we'll be disobedient to the one who gave us the blessings in the first place. Oh, God, I can't follow you today because I'm afraid I'll lose what you gave me already. Great. Well, I gave you that because you were faithful. I gave you that because I wanted to bless you. And so for you to reject me because you want to hold on to the thing that I gave you, do you not still trust me? Do you not believe that I can give you good things?
Didn't they have a choice to make?
I mean, this was a choice. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same, and they had free will to decide to follow him or not. And we know as apostles, they continued to have free will on whether or not they would continue to follow him, i.e. Judas, right? Judas had free will to do the devil's work and to betray Jesus. And so they continued to have free will as apostles to go about and to decide whether they're going to continue to follow Jesus. Where's the microphone? Miss Linda Brown. So again, he calls them there. We know that also we have Matthew's calling as well. Matthew being a tax collector. Sorry, Siri, go away. Yes.
Well, I always think about the immediate part. There have been people that I studied with, and they knew the truth, they knew what they needed to do, and they just decided for whatever reason, I'm going to wait. And one of them got in a car wreck and almost died. Another person, I don't remember exactly what happened, but they knew the truth and they didn't act on it immediately. And so when you think about salespeople, they try to get you to sign on a dotted line immediately. And so if you're talking about your salvation, immediate is immediate.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, the urgency in all of this, to do it right away. Not, that sounds great. Let me finish my nets here. Let me get the fishing done for today, and then I'll follow you. And Jesus actually addresses that kind of situation later on, doesn't he? When he tells people to follow him, it's like, again, lists some very important things like I have to go bury my father. Wow, yeah, that's important. But again, as crazy as it sounds, not as important as following Jesus. Right? It's not as important. He's the one who gave you your father, right? None of us chose which family we were going to be born into, better or worse, right? And so again, even those things, my children that I have, where do they come from? Maybe don't answer that question. But they're a blessing, aren't they? They're a blessing from God. And so even my children who are so important and valuable to me cannot come before the one who gave me those children, right? I'm just a steward of them. They're really God's. And so I'm just holding on to them, protecting them, raising them up like He would want me to, right? So again, all of this very important. As I said, we have Jesus calling them, makes them fishermen of men. We know that Jesus also continues on. He calls Matthew, who was a tax collector, right? He was at work. He was collecting taxes, and he called him to be a tax collector. We didn't get into all the various occupations they had, all the different kinds of backgrounds, but Jesus pulled them together to make them disciples. Whether they were a zealot, right? Someone who was, really on fire and kind of a military mindset for the occupation of Rome, right? They wanted to destroy him, murder him, kill him, get him out of there. A tax collector who was seen as, again, just someone who was lower than dirt, right? They were just awful. You didn't want to associate with them. And Jesus calls a tax collector in Matthew to come and to follow him. Again, the last thing I'll say about that is one, let's reach everybody with the gospel because everyone needs to hear it. But also to not limit ourselves or to be limiting on other people simply because of their past or their background or whatever. We all have a past. Many of us, a past that we're not proud of. But look where we're at today. We're in a church building on Sunday when maybe we didn't want to be there as teenagers, right? We're studying the gospel. We're trying to spread the message of Jesus Christ. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at other people of what might they become that will help increase the kingdom of God. All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you.